Good morning. Welcome to the Finance Administration's Committee Special Work Session. And it is 9 a.m. on August 10th. First on our agenda is public comment. If there's anybody in the audience that would like to provide public comment, please address those comments to the chair and you have 3 minutes. It's a huge audience this morning. All right. Next on the agenda is approval of the agenda. Do I have a motion to approve?
I'll make that motion.
Second.
Do we have any discussion? And since this is addressing finances, do we need to go to a roll call vote or we can just go ahead and vote? Okay, so all those in favor of approving the agenda, please say aye.
Aye.
And those who oppose, say nay. The approval of the agenda moves forward. All right, we have no consent resolutions and we have no action items on the agenda as well. So we're moving to committee reports. And the first committee report is review and discussion of the proposed FY 2024 county budget.
I'll make that motion.
Do we have a second?
I'll second that.
And now we're going to go into discussion. And so discussion related to, so I want to created some notes last night, just kind of in preparation for this budget work session. I have compiled a list of items other Board of Commissioner members have shared with me that they feel are important to this budgeting process. If there are other Board of Commissioner members that have additional items that they haven't shared, I would like you to go ahead and share those with me, and I'll record those additional items today and we can address those on 8/21 when we meet again.
I'm sorry, Madam Chair, could you repeat the instructions?
Sure. If there are other Board of Commissioner members that have items that they want to discuss today,
So we won't be asking questions is what you're saying?
you can ask questions. Absolutely.
Okay, so but then what would be the purpose of addressing it? Oops. I guess I'm confused. We're asking questions or we're sending our questions to you?
Sure. Here, let me go ahead and finish what I was
Sure.
saying.
Sorry about
Hopefully
that.
That'll clarify it for you. So as we come together, like I said, to discuss the upcoming budget, I recognize and I appreciate the dedication, the hard work and consideration that each of you brings to this table. Our roles as stewards of this county finances come with tremendous responsibility, especially during times of uncertainty. We are all experiencing the stress caused by inflation. There are 6 items that have been brought forward for discussion today for the fiscal year 2024 budget. So the first item is creation of a Veterans Department in Ottawa County. And that's to make our heroes of freedom a priority and hiring of a director to perform full assessment of needs in the county. Updated Corporation Council budget to reflect current hours needed in the county. And discussion on our current grant funds that the county is receiving. What are the funds? And what are the county's obligations and citizen participation requirements for the funding? What is the grant duration and steps to move grant funds from programs that are ending or no longer relevant? County building usage, how efficiently are the buildings being used? And are there ways that we can use those buildings more efficiently? Budgeted positions versus hired positions. And then the new commissioners were elected on a platform that promised fiscal responsibility and efficiency. It's with that sense of responsibility, I would like to, this is my idea, I would like to ask each department to take a look at their budgets and see if there is a way that they can find an across the board reduction, not necessarily in a specific percentage, but reduction in their overall budgeted number. I think that would provide a great example for all of us who are trying to restrain our own budgets. So I see supply management as being a real opportunity there. So I would like to allow for discussion of each of these items, take one item at a time. And once discussion is complete, I would like to open up the work session to additional items for discussion. And we'll do that, we can do that discussion at the next Finance and Administration work session to be held on 8/21/23. So item number 1, creation of the Veterans Department in Ottawa County. we have discussion? Commissioner Rhodey?
Yes, I would like to provide some background information on this and some statistics and data. So the needs of our veterans is an issue that's, been brought forward by constituents and sounds like it's kind of been an ongoing thing for a number of years where our veterans just really could use some more support. We can do, I think, a better job and pay more attention to this here in our county. So just want to provide a little information. Our vets make up about 6% of our population and account for 24% of our suicide deaths. The 2020 census provided us with some information, and I'm going to do some comparisons between Ottawa County, Muskegon County, and Kent as they're our neighbors. And our vets actually often access services from both. Oftentimes our Grand Haven vets are going to Muskegon, and our Georgetown area veterans are going to Kent County. Many of our veterans go to Kent County for counseling services. So here's some data. The number of veterans identified by the census in Ottawa County are 12,310. In Muskegon County, 10,884. In Kent County, 28,175. The population of Ottawa County is 296,000, according to the census. Muskegon, 175,000. Kent, 657,000. The median income of Ottawa is 77,000. Muskegon is 57,000. Kent is 69,000. And I don't have this data here, but there's, some variation in home values, taxable, the total taxable values for our millages. The percentage of people living in poverty in Ottawa is 7.5%. Muskegon is 14.4%, and Kent is 9.9%. In regards to the status of a veteran services millage, Ottawa County does not have one. Muskegon County does have a millage, and it's 0.077 mils, which yields about, well, in 2019, I don't have the most recent numbers handy right this second, but in 2019, that yielded 330,000 for the veteran services. In Kent County, they also have a millage. It's 0.05 mils. In 2023, that was 1,432,000. In regards to passing a veteran service millage, when Muskegon County put that up for a vote, 84% of the voters voted yes. In Kent County, 77% of voters voted yes. So I think we can look at our neighbor counties and see that as far as support for serving veterans is very high across the whole entire political spectrum. The Veteran Services budget in 2023 for Muskegon was $519,000. In Kent, it was $1.36 million. Let's see here. So obviously, Ottawa County does not have a millage to support veterans, but we are in a healthy financial position. And so we're proposing that we take a look at bringing on a veterans department and looking at serving them in a way similar to Muskegon and Kent, but potentially looking at Muskegon as a model. They've been reported to be providing excellent services. And so one other, let's see here. So one other thing to consider too is that we this year did receive an increase in our Veteran County Services Fund grant award. And so typically that, or in the last year, it had been about $80,000. And this year it's now $161,000. And so the grant, what has been presented is that the plan was for it to be used for more outreach, for more billboards and more medical transportation. The grant is intended to be used to launch, this is according to the grant, launch a countywide marketing campaign geared towards increasing awareness of services and support for our veterans, expand medical transportation services, install better directional and wayfinding signage. And the intent of this grant is actually, I'm losing my place here, but it's actually to help counties establish a veterans department. And so doing this would be consistent with this grant increase that we received. So we have not completely flushed out all of the numbers of this on this yet. But I would be proposing that we would look at creating something similar to Muskegon County. When you look at the financial numbers, the numbers of veterans served, it seems like that would be something that we can take on.
Commissioner Zalstra?
Yeah, just kind of, have we had discussions with Lauren and with the Veterans Affairs Committee and see how they think through this? I mean, we have obviously Department of Veterans Affairs already. And we're just gonna add some, looks like there has been some discussion.
Yes.
Yeah, there's
so-
actually been
Commissioner
a
Moss.
lot of discussion.
Mm.
Yes, yeah.
Yes, and so I would say we haven't talked to them fully about expanding fully in this manner, but the intent would not be to replace their work at all,
Okay.
but it would be to bring on additional services. I really value what they're doing there. They're great, service for our vets. And so I think we would just be bringing in more supports. One thing that stood out to me in talking with him is that there seems to be a little bit concern about, if we do outreach to our veterans and more veterans come for services, how will we be able to serve them? And so I think there is a need for more resources
Mhm.
because if we increase outreach, I think we will increase.
No, I totally agree with
needs.
you. I definitely agree.
Yeah, but this is not in any way, a negative, about what's been going on, just a realization that we
Okay,
need to
yeah,
do
no,
more.
I totally agree.
So-
What you're saying. I just want to make sure that Lauren's, in the loop and is,
It's to make it.
agreeing with these as well, because I think, he would be the one doing a lot of the carrying out of this, so.
Make the department more robust is what you're
Yes.
saying,
Well, and
as far
and-
as services are concerned.
in regards to that, I don't think that, so we had a discussion with Lauren this week and if I'm going to put words in his mouth a little bit here, but from our discussion, and correct me if I'm wrong, Joe, but I don't think Lauren is looking to work more than he's working right now. And so we would be looking at creating a position for a director
Okay.
for the Veterans Department. And so our hope would not be to overwhelm them with more work, have them continue to serve the vets as they have been, but bring in a director to create and flush out this department.
Okay.
and then lead it. So my personal hope would be that they would connect with Muskegon County and try to replicate a lot of the work that's been going on there.
So and your intention is to borrow best practices from the counties that surround us?
Yes,
Correct. And then review, maybe they'll share funding sources, including a millage, but also grant monies that might be available.
yes, and I would hope, and I think Muskegon and Kent can give us some direction on this, but our vets do have a lot of, they have a lot of needs, and I would hope that we can tie some of that even in with our CMH and, our health department. And so hopefully we can have some coordination going on there too.
Commissioner Miedema?
So I'm personally excited at the opportunity to discuss this further and bring this to light. I think about door knocking. It was an issue that came up often, vets and mental health, as well as I think about all the applications that came in for the Veterans Department this year, as well as the mental health volunteer positions. And to me, that shows the knowledge of the need in our community when you have that many applications. And so I'm excited to see where this might go.
Chair Cosby.
Oh, Commissioner Moss.
Yeah, I'd like to add, I think this is a huge opportunity for the county. I'd say this probably should have been addressed long ago. The actual amount that's being spent to support veterans in Ottawa is extremely low. And when you compare Ottawa to Kent or Muskegon, I mean, we're talking the staff in Ottawa who are working extremely hard, doing their very best. It's a very unique setup. It's different than probably any other county. The staff who is work 1 day a week, and I think the total expenditure for that staff portion has historically been about $30,000 a year total. So we're comparing spending historically $30,000 for staffing related to Veterans Affairs, related to these other budgets that are $500,000 or $1 million or $1.5 million. I'd say this is a huge opportunity and long overdue. So I really am happy that this has come up, that the need was identified, and I think through working with Lauren and his team, I mean, he's expressed that they absolutely want to continue. And so working with them and the VSOs that we do have is going to be excellent. And bringing in a director will help the county identify and perform an assessment for what we truly need. And so that's not something that the existing staff could undertake. They are busy as it is. And so bringing in a director will allow that person to kind of, like Administrator Gibbs has talked about, like stay high level and delegate and perform the assessment that's necessary moving forward. Hope that helps.
Commissioner Brody.
Yes, and so I just want to put on the table too, that there has been an identified need for a highly trained, experienced VSO to help process claims. And so again, that's being handled by several individuals. And so that's a situation that we would hope that a veterans director would help us assess as well, because we want to make sure that that need is being met, and that also may be a current gap. So the veterans director would be a first step in assessment and setting some goals and communicating with the other counties. And then there may be additional needs identified.
Commissioner Bonema.
Really appreciated all the stats that you brought to this. As I was writing them down, 6% of the population are veterans, and that's in Ottawa County, right? Those are Ottawa County specific stats.
Correct.
Okay. How did that compare to Muskegon County?
I don't have that specific stat on the other counties. We could do some math and figure it out, but
Because I'd love to find out how, as we rattled through our stats, how they compare directly to Muskegon County, who has a program in place. And, if our suicide rate is 24% of our suicides are veterans, can we demonstrate progress, because of the programs put in place in Muskegon, that maybe it's less than 24%. So I think doing a side-by-side comparison might be beneficial to this conversation.
Yep.
Need baseline in order to make that very accurate. But it's co-benefit, definitely. Commissioner Miedema.
And how long maybe those departments have been in operation comparatively wise to show, right?
Yeah. Do we know if this program's been there for a decade or just recent?
So I'm probably not fully accurate on this, but I want to say it might have started like in 2019. It's not super long standing in Muskegon.
Commissioner Moss.
Yeah, one thing to highlight would be some of the work that's been done in Muskegon. Some of their outreach communication tools. They have a website that has videos and makes it very easy for veterans or their spouses to understand some of the processes involved. And from talking with Lauren and others, it sounds like a lot of the the paperwork that's required for veterans to get benefits can be time consuming, it can be complicated, and that's why they have these service officers who are trained in these huge manuals to understand all the regulations. But you don't just go in and fill out a form and get benefits. I don't know how many months it takes to go through all of those processes, but I understand it can take a very long time. So making this a higher priority for the county, I think is going to be excellent.
Any further discussion? Commissioner Ebel?
I'm not sure what year this was, but according to what I'm researching right now in Muskegon County, the percent of residents that are veterans are 8.5%. And that's about 11,376 veterans, but it doesn't really state the year. Also, I like what the Muskegon County Veterans Affairs states, that their mission is to fulfill President Lincoln's promise to care for him who shall have borne the battle and for his widow and his orphan by providing accurate, efficient, and timely service to maximize the benefits for the veterans and their families. Also, I was recently at a funeral in July, and this young man was 39 years old, and he was a Marine, and he passed away suddenly. And he had a military funeral. And there was a lot of veterans there. And it was very powerful because I would say about 20 of them came and saluted him as they walked away. And it was very powerful. And afterwards, I spoke to them and I said to them, so what can we do? And this was in Grand Haven. And I asked them, what can we do to help you? And then he said, honor us, because America would not be free. This is what they stated. America would not be free if it hadn't been for the veterans, especially the ones who gave up everything, all their lives, their futures. And that really impressed me. And so therefore, I'm very supportive of this.
Any further discussion? Seeing none, we'll move on to item number 2. And that's the updated Corporation Council's budget to reflect current hours needed at the county. Discussion about that.
I could make a comment. The current amount in the budget was a calculation based on the original contract, like minimum. We've seen that the need is a little higher, so we just need to increase it a little bit so it matches the current need. So.
Commissioner Rhodey?
I have some numbers to put to that
Thank
if we'd like to put those out there. There's the corporate counsel department estimates the common legal group will bill approximately 35 hours a week for corporate counsel legal services, which is not the litigation services through the insurance authority for the foreseeable future. The contract calls for an hourly rate of $225 from October through December of 2023. And the hourly rate will increase to $240 beginning January of 2024 per the contract. Doing the math, this totals $430,500 for the period from October 1, 2023 through September 30, 2024. So the request is that the proposed budget fiscal year 2024 line contracted services under corporate counsel be revised to the amount of $430,500. So this is an additional $55,300 to the contracted services line above what is currently there. So setting a more realistic figure at the beginning of the fiscal year may and hopefully will avoid future budget adjustments.
Thank you. Any further discussion? Seeing none, we'll
Well,
move.
I do have a
Oh,
question.
sorry. Commissioner Bonema?
Yeah, thank you. There was a point that was made at a prior meeting about past legal budgets being north of $1 million. But I think that there was some further investigation into that was including, was it $700,000 towards a land purchase? So I just wanted to make sure that the facts were straight, that Ottawa County has not been spending north of $1 million a year on legal defense fees or legal fees. That was a unique situation where the purchase of land was put through the legal department. And maybe Commissioner Zalstra knows more details, but was it 700 and something thousand?
Yeah, I think it was 730 or something for the piece of land. Sorry.
Would you clarify that number thing or that particular issue?
Sure.
Thank you.
I believe it was 730 for the land,
Okay.
west of us. But I mean,
Just
sorry.
to be clear, then Commissioner Zalstra, what you're saying is the cost or what? Explain to me what the $730,000
I think
represented.
it's a better question for Karen. I'm not in the weeds on
Do you
corporate
know,
counsel
Karen?
activities day to day,
Sorry.
so.
Just so,
And maybe
point of
she-
clarity. Yeah.
The 700,000 or thereabouts was the cost of the parcel of land that was purchased. So it was a capital outlay line in Corporation Council's budget. So it wasn't necessarily paid to Corporation Council. It was paid to purchase land.
Okay, thank you. So it's capital purchase.
Is that traditionally the way that we purchase land is through Corporation Council? Or this was just a unique scenario that required that?
It was unique. It was an opportunity that came up. And so it was being managed by Corporation Council. I mean, they were negotiating and doing the work of purchasing. They were signing off. So we added the budget for that opportunity to capital outlay in Corporation Council's budget because that's where it was being managed and that was where, so land frequently, I wouldn't say it would be normal to be purchased from Corporation Council, but this was just a unique opportunity. We didn't have another project. So say, we wanted to build a building or we wanted to, it would normally be part of a larger project and it normally wouldn't, we don't run all of our land capital outlay through Corporation Council. It was just unique. It was kind of the circumstances more than the normal.
May I continue?
Sure.
Would you be able to provide the amount that's been spent for Corporation Council in the last 5 years by year? Not right at this moment, but is that something that you can give us so that we actually have numbers to work with that are reflective of the actual numbers?
Yes, we have that information.
When
Just
can that be available to us?
Just for a point of clarity, are you talking about a contract with Corporation Council? Are you talking about Corporation Council's budget in total? Because
I'm looking to
Corporation
do an
Council, obviously-
apples to apples comparison to what we're receiving from the Common Group. So the best example of what's been paid prior to what's being expected to be paid going forward, how does that compare?
We have that information.
You can make that request of her probably via email too. So it's real specific.
Sure.
Question for you about the $700,000 purchase to capital purchase through Corporation Council. Did Corporation Council just, were they paid their contracted fee for that or were there additional monies received for handling this particular project? And if you don't know that answer, if I could get it from you.
I could check, but I'm fairly certain it was part of their normal Corporation Council billing
Hourly rate.
hourly rate.
Thank you.
Just to follow up on page 6 where it says detailed summary of changes to expenses. Right now it says corporate counsel in 2023 corporate question was wages, whereas in 2024 it was contracted service. The change says 254, 200. I'm assuming that's going to be 3 something. What was the addition, Commissioner Rudy?
So I'll just give you the total. The total would be 430,500 for this next fiscal year.
Okay, so it's like a $50,000 increase in that line item right there, right?
But yeah, I think it's 55,300.
Thank you. So seeing no further discussion. Next item on the agenda was the grant funds that the county is receiving. We want to look at what the county or the citizen participation requirements are for the funding and what the duration of the grants are, and then what steps are normally taken to discontinue those programs when they discontinue and or they are no longer relevant. Do we have any discussion?
I guess I'm
Ross?
wondering that last part of your question, if a grant becomes irrelevant or, what do you do with it? How is that handled? That might be a fiscal question or administration or something else. Get details on like what happens to it.
When grants end.
Yeah.
So most of our grants are reimbursement grants. And so if there is a budget or contract for a grant and there is a program that's outlined and let's say, for example, all the funds are not expended. We haven't asked for them because we only ask for them on a reimbursement basis. So at the end of the year, the funds would just lapse. Both the revenue and the expense would offset each other. So we would be reimbursed for the expenses we've incurred. And then for, anything that we haven't incurred, we haven't asked for. So it would just go away at the end of the fiscal year unless there was a budget adjustment. Sometimes if you don't spend all the grant funds, they'll say, oh, you can have 3 more months or, you can finish the program or whatever. And so then there would be a budget adjustment in the following year outlining that we would like to finish the program or whatever the case might be.
Commissioner Moss.
So what if a grant was not continued or terminated mid-year or before it was rebudgeted? So what if, there's like 1,000 grants or something in our packet or a couple thousand grants, 5,000, I don't know.
53.7%.
Right. So there's a lot of grants. What happens if one of those grants the board decides not to pursue?
If the board decided not to pursue a grant, I suppose a budget adjustment, we should do a budget adjustment. Therefore, there would not be the opportunity to necessarily accidentally or have program expenses charged, not accidentally, but program expenses would not be charged that would not be reimbursed.
Additional discussion? Seeing none, thank you. Moving on to county building usage. And so what we want to look at is how efficiently the buildings are being used. And are there ways that the buildings could be more efficiently used? I don't see Blake.
He was here.
He was here. We lost Blake. You want to put that one on hold for a little bit, or do we want to talk about it?
Come back around.
Come back around. All right. And then budgeted positions versus number 5 is budgeted positions versus hired. I think this subject came up for just an opportunity for cost savings. And then County Administrator Gibbs, do you have any information you'd like to provide regarding budgeted positions? And then how many are actually hired? So those posted versus hired.
Sure. Just a couple of really brief points. One thing that could be looked at is if we have positions that have been posted for a very long time, but haven't been filled. I think it's a legitimate discussion to ask if we want to keep that position on the budget or maybe remove it if operations have been continuing as normal without having filled that for a long period of time. So that is data that I'm in the process of getting right now for all the commissioners to review as part of your decision making.
Great. And like what timeline are you looking at, Mr. Gibbs, as far as months out for
in terms
postings.
of the
Months
data.
out for the posting. So these are jobs that are posted to our job board.
I'm looking right now. I picked a number of 6 months, but we could get different data as well if that's desired. Certainly able to do that.
Commissioner Moss.
So I want to make sure I'm understanding. So what you're saying is we may have a certain number of jobs that have been posted for a long time. They're in the budget, but they're not necessarily, well, they're not being filled. Is
Correct.
that right?
Yes.
So a potential then, or a logical next step is to look at those to say, is there something wrong with these specific positions? Or is there, do we need to make a change to the way that they're posted? Are some of them not needed? And if they've gone on for, if the postings have been there for 6 months or 12 months, or I guess I don't know how long, we can look at the data. Then maybe they are not needed if it's gone on that long and they haven't been filled, or maybe a different position has been added and filled in the meantime.
Sure.
So am I understanding that correctly?
Correct.
Yes, those are all things to look at, I believe. Yep.
Thanks.
Then maybe get a dollar amount that's associated with it that we would be saving as well.
And
Commissioner Moss.
so if there were positions, if there were savings that were born out of that, then that could either be retained for the taxpayers or reallocated to something different, potentially.
Or a cost savings to the department as well.
Got it.
Yeah.
Got it. Thank you.
Commissioner Zalstra.
Yeah, just a clarification. This is more of a, I guess your point is more of an HR question than a finance question, because I mean, if we don't fill it, we have an underspend in that department, right? I mean, so it's not necessarily a financial question or more of a HR, are we posting for the correct position as opposed to should we be spending the money? Because obviously if we're not filling it, we're not spending the money.
We're not spending the money and it's already allocated to the department, and isn't an opportunity for the department actually to save, you know, a certain percentage of their total budget, which gets, I believe, reallocated back to the general fund
In some cases.
in some cases.
If they're
Yeah.
in the general fund, it would be reallocated to the general.
And if it's a different fund too, so we need to investigate that piece as well. And if there is a surplus, we talked about CIP in the general fund, we're able to move dollars from the general fund to CIP.
So so if a position isn't filled or there's any sort of savings in a department that in the general fund, it's not spent. And then that just really goes into the savings account, or what we call fund balance. And then we have some policy on how much fund balance we want to maintain, and for just to respond to unforeseen events. And so we maintain that, and then anything excess above that would be available to reallocate, but it's really one-time money. So generally one-time money, we wouldn't start a new program. We would try to invest that in something that would be one-time expense, which is usually paying off some kind of a liability that already exists, or maybe CIP is a great example of a one-time.
Wonderful. Thank you very much.
Great.
Any further,
Yeah.
Commissioner Bonema?
Just kind of drilling a little bit deeper as we look at our needs that we have in the county. And it seems that we're having to increase our legal budget because of the increased request of FOIAs. Is this a place where we could contract out somebody at a more junior pay grade versus our senior corporate counsel reviewing all the FOIA requests, where they could be reviewed by somebody other than our most senior attorneys, and maybe prevent us from having to add more money for corporate counsel, and instead to contract out the need to review FOIA requests that way?
And again, this is Commissioner Brody. Sorry, I was going to call you Moss.
That's okay. So I can speak to that just a little bit. I think that an increase in FOIAs is a narrative that kind of took root and isn't really the core root of why we have increased legal costs. There were a lot of things that need to be taken, careful look at, things like our contracts and things that probably weren't being given enough attention by our prior corporate counsel. And so as a growing, increasing, like we have a very large county here and a very large budget. We have large departments we're responsible for. And so having adequate corporate counsel is a wise thing. And I don't think we were having enough attention being given to our legal processes before. And so that is the true reason why we have an increase in corporate counsel costs. It's not related to FOIAs. Has there been an increase in FOIAs? Yes, but a lot of that work is handled by the departments. It's handled with the help of the legal secretary. And when, corporate counsel needs to review those things, it does, but that's not the bulk of their work.
Follow up.
Commissioner Baumann.
Mr. Jordan, could you give us a percentage breakdown of approximately what your billable hours are towards reviewing FOIA requests? And then what you expect to need if the body cams would be implemented? Because whenever we have an event that is of interest and they get FOIA'd, hours and hours of those camera footage also need to be reviewed,
Commissioner
redacted
Baumann,
and taken care of.
is that something you could actually put in an email request? Because are you prepared to answer that question in this moment?
Well, as far as FOIAs in our department, that fluctuates. So I can't give you a percentage breakdown today. As far as body cams, those FOIAs that would be done by the sheriff's department, and they have their own FOIA officer.
Mhm. So that's obviously an added expense. So that's where I'm going with this. Is this something that we could contract out versus have to hire in because it does fluctuate? Would there be, efficiencies of scale there with that? But if you could get back to us for your first 6 months, approximately what percentage of your billable hours were directed towards reviewing FOIA requests versus contracts, like what Commissioner Rhodey is speaking to, I would appreciate that. And I can put that into an email for you.
It's not a problem, but I would also add that Commissioner Rhodey has outlined it correctly. I think the narrative that we only handle FOIAs is the primary objective of what we do is a false one.
Great. I think that this, details like this, facts help prove that narrative.
Okay.
Yeah.
Any further discussion? Seeing none, moving on to the last item. And that is asking for an across the board reduction in budgets for the departments. And I put a number in there of 5%. I don't know if that's realistic, but just as we're all trying to tighten our belts due to inflationary pressures, I think it's a real opportunity to demonstrate to our community and our taxpayers that we're willing to do the same thing here at the county, and things like supply management, for instance, and procurement. I think there's a real easy opportunity there. And as we're talking about positions as well, Karen's making a face. But if there are positions that have been on the board, it's kind of low hanging fruit too. We've been doing the work without the position being filled. Is there an opportunity to return some of those dollars that have been budgeted back into the department budget? So, and Karen, you're welcome to share with me what your concerns might be if you. Yep. Commissioner Moss.
Sure, just one comment. We are experiencing inflationary pressures. The county is, so are our residents, and so is our budget. So there will be areas that can't be reduced, and that's okay. I mean, it's not great, but that's reality. So like utilities are likely not going to be reduced.
It's not a department.
But it's not a department.
It's a line item.
So just given that consideration, I think it's a fair question to ask, where are there cost savings? And that is something that the departments have to answer if the question is raised. The board is not running the departments.
No, absolutely not.
So I appreciate the question.
Not being prescriptive either in the request.
Right.
This is typical business management kind of opportunities during budget to ask for a reduction in total cost. So just whatever that might be, but that can be a decision that's made departmentally as well.
Mhm.
So, all right. So we have discussed each item, and are there other items that other Board of Commissioners would like to bring forward that we can discuss on 8/21? Commissioner Zelstra?
Karen, were you going to respond to that or? I didn't know if you had asked Karen to respond to that.
Would you like
yeah.
to respond? You're fine.
I mean,
More of a
I
department
see
item.
what Commissioner Moss is saying, but I think also if we're in the position of saying we need to reduce service levels in Ottawa County, I think we should be the ones who say, you know, we think this area, this position, I don't think it's fair to say to staff, cut 5%. Right? I think it's, if we're gonna make that decision to say, we're gonna reduce service levels in Ottawa County by 5%, versus this presented budget, we should be the ones to say, this area doesn't need those services, right? You've already, may I finish? I mean, we've already increased corporate counsel's budget substantially, the administrator's budget substantially.
I would like to interject because you're using a term that's incorrect. I did not say reduce services. I'm talking.
Well,
about
if you're-
supply
Could I
chain.
respond to that actually, Commissioner Cosby? I'd like to respond to
Commissioner
that
Moss.
briefly. So, Commissioner Zalstra is using this term service levels. I think what he means to say is spending taxpayer dollars. No one's talking about reducing services or trying to reduce the quality of services provided. I think that the question that you asked is a valid question. Now, he's arguing it's not a valid question, but the question is valid. And who has the best understanding of each budget? The department. So as a board, if we had a question, could we find areas where we could reduce expenses? We're not talking about reducing services. We're talking about reducing expenses. We would go to the department. We wouldn't have a grand, dictate from on high, cut by 30%. That's not a thing. You're talking normal business practices, looking at budgets, saying, is there any area here that we could have savings in this next year? That's a healthy question to be asking.
It's purely voluntary is what I'm asking. So.
One more thing too. It's my understanding that the default position in Ottawa County is to increase spending. That has been our default to the best of my knowledge. I think what you're getting at is perhaps we should look at challenging that a little bit, challenge that status quo where we're always increasing countywide, because things do fluctuate, things do change. We may identify a need and need to increase a budget here or increase a budget there or reduce one here. Veterans Department, which we currently do not have in Ottawa, it's a good example. You find an opportunity and you go after it. So I would definitely challenge our default position as a county of being always increasing.
Commissioner
May I
Zylstra.
finish my point, I guess, is that, I mean, this budget pursues a certain level of spending, as Commissioner Moss says, but we provide, our spending is services, right? Some of them are frontline, some of them are support, but what we do is provide services. So if you're going to say, here's a presented budget that accomplishes X amount of services for Ottawa County residents, and you think that those services need to be cut by 5%, I disagree with that. But if you think that, then I think that you need to go in and say, look, the FOC custody investigator We don't
No,
need
I'm
to
sorry,
provide that
Mr.
service.
Zalstra, you're going down a path that I did not state.
You're
I-
putting
I
words in
did
her
not
mouth.
state.
This is my
I
opinion.
used it as an
Okay,
example.
I'm-
I use 5% as an example. It is not prescriptive.
I'm only using the
It's
number you gave me.
traditional in business during budget planning that we look for cost savings in things like waste. That can be supply management as an example. My understanding is we're using staples here. Is there an opportunity to procure supplies differently where we take advantage of the large quantities in which we order? As an example, are there positions that are posted currently on the board that have not been filled for over 6 months? And maybe we bring those down and use those budgeted dollars in other places where we provide services to our county. These are just recommendations at this point, but the last thing I'm trying to do is deny services to the county of Ottawa.
Okay, may I again attempt to finish my point? I mean,
So long as it's accurate.
I guess my point is my point, and I think I'm entitled to my opinion. You may disagree with my opinion, and you may think that it's wrong. But at the end of the day, I look at this budget, it provides X amount of services to county residents. And when you say, let's cut this budget by 5%, for me, you're cutting services by 5%. You may disagree with that statement. That's how I view it. Thank you.
So do you recognize that health systems cut their budgets by percentages in this very way? And health systems actually provide services. It's not an unusual request. In government, it may be an unusual request, but in
Good
business,
point.
it's not. Commissioner Moss.
Yeah, I hear what Commissioner Zalstra is, I think, trying to do with his line of questioning, where he's saying, if you think we should cut by 5%, if you say let's cut by 5%, he's trying to push it right back on you to build a narrative. I think that's disingenuous.
Again, may I finish? I think it's only fair to say, if you think that this budget is wasteful, point out where the waste is, right? I think all our departments heads will say, we use the dollars well. And if you disagree with that statement, I think that that's incumbent on you to provide oversight and say, we don't think you're providing it well. Here's what we think we should cut.
My
Commissioner,
intention is
comments?
not to be that prescriptive.
Commissioner
Commissioner Zalstra.
Commissioner Gaza. I'm sorry, I have one more thing.
Commissioner Moss.
Commissioner Zylstra, I'm fairly certain the chair is not saying that the budget is wasteful, as you have insinuated.
I think she used the word, but
She's looking for areas to save our taxpayers money. That is good and healthy.
And I did not say that it was wasteful. I asked if there are areas of waste that the department heads can identify where we could have cost savings for the government, for our county. Commissioner Rhodey.
I would just say that if we have placed people in positions of directing a department, they should have the ability to analyze where costs could be cut. That should be a part of their responsibility. If they can come to us and say, this is where we would like to spend more money, they should also be able to look at the budget and see where they can save some money. I don't think that your request is unreasonable. I think if we have hired competent leadership, this is a reasonable request for them to consider.
County Administrator Gibbs.
Thank you, Chair Cosby. Actually, Commissioner Rhodey kind of said exactly what I was going to say, but from at least the vantage point that I sit at, one way that I could look at this is ask the department directors to say, if you were asked to cut X%, just if, it's not saying that it's absolutely going to happen, but if that were going to happen, where would that come from within your departments? Kind of work with them to get those numbers, and that could form a starting point for a discussion. And I would also say just a little anecdote from my experience and to Joel's points, Commissioner Moss's points. If you look, for example, at homelessness spending all across the country, over the past 20 years, it's increased by something like threefold. Massive, massive increases in homelessness spending. But homelessness itself has also increased by about the same amount. So it is not necessarily the case that when the government wants to spend more on something, to quote unquote help solve the problem. It's not always the case that it actually solves the problem. So that's just one example of a case where there is lots of spending increases, but it's not only not helping the problem is also getting worse. So part of all of our jobs here is to look carefully with sharp eyes at what kind of spending is really accomplishing what we want it to be accomplishing, and maybe things that could be allocated to other areas if it's not doing what we need it to be doing. So thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Moss?
Sure. Just a really positive example of creative thinking in addition to supplies. So let's say a department has 5 people in it, and they've had a position posted for the last 6 months. And due to the extra workload, one of those 5 people in the department has worked overtime for the last 6 months, or maybe the last 12 months. Perhaps that person has now discovered that they can handle the requirements going into that job posting. So what do? Do you just drop the posting? Perhaps. Maybe that person has found a way to optimize their time so that they can handle the requirements for that department very well. Perhaps the director identifies a need to give that employee who is working overtime or working extremely hard, who has bettered themselves, maybe they need a raise. But if you give someone a raise that costs $5,000 or something and save a position that costs 80 grand or 100 grand or whatever it is with benefits, those are potential cost savings and could benefit county employees and our residents. So there are great opportunities here for the county, but the question must be asked. And that is what the board needs to do. So I appreciate your question, like I said before.
Thank you. Any further discussion? Seeing none. Oh, sorry. Commissioner Ebel?
I think what I heard the chair say was that like Commissioner Zastra says, that we need to give a number, even though it might be just a something not in black and white, but a suggestion. And what I heard Chair Cosby say was that she was just saying 5%, but it wasn't cut in stone. She was just a suggestion, is what I heard. And I agree that the directors of every department are there because they're experts in their field. And they have a overall look of their department, an umbrella approach. And they can see where the needs are and where they're not. And I know we've had quite a few directors come and talk to us about different things. We've heard directors come in and say, we've had these positions posted for many, many months and we have no applicants. That doesn't mean that maybe those positions need to be reevaluated, maybe be looked at again and maybe changed so that they could be more advantageous to look at other people that can maybe apply for those positions and maybe not. And I do know that working in healthcare for many years, I know every year we had to look at our budget and see how we could cut it. They didn't necessarily, they kind of gave us an idea of maybe 5%, 2%, 1%, 3%. But we always had to look at our budget and see how we could save cost, and whether that meant having to throw our own trash away in our own office, that was a way to save some money. So I think it was just a recommendation is what I heard, and not necessarily a mandate. So, and I think it's a very good suggestion. Thank you.
Purely an ask. Commissioner Bonema.
Yeah, thank you. Just to put a nice bow on this last one, we always end our meetings at work with who's doing what by when. And on this one, do we have a specific ask? Because I've heard two different avenues where maybe a request is going out to department heads to come back with any suggestions that they might have for cost savings. But then I also heard a secondary where the administrator is saying that he'd be willing to have those conversations and then get back to us. Just wanted to clearly understand what the ask was going forward.
I feel it's appropriate that County Administrator Gibbs, since the department heads report to him, make that ask.
I'll be happy to make that ask.
Commissioner Rhodey?
Yes, I just have a question for Karen a second. I'm just wondering, Karen, what was the overall percentage of increase in our budget? So like it probably varies by department, but just overall, what kind of an increase are we looking at as presented?
So the budget was, I think that was almost, wasn't it 5.6 on that slide? I'm going from memory.
Yeah, that sounds about
Sounds
right.
like 5 or
So.
right around 5
Okay, I
total. So just a point of clarity, there are some areas that are not, like if I think about, we have several grants that are, or departments that are completely, there is no tax dollar savings. Are you making a distinction?
I think that's important to do also. Typically speaking, in these situations, it comes back to finance to see, because there will be departments that you just cannot make an adjustment, a reduction. And then there are others that have a little more flexibility that way. So, those that come from the general fund, is that what your recommendation?
I wasn't a
Or
recommendation. It
what
was
you-
just it's just a point of clarity. If you're looking to reduce the tax burden,
More,
I
Correct.
wasn't sure that's what I thought I understood.
Yeah.
So that there are areas that receive very little in support of that would be equated to tax dollars.
no, so those that absolutely are funded by taxes.
Mhm.
So those areas, Commissioner Miedema?
May I ask a point of clarity? So you're referring more to grants. So like if ones are not falling on the taxes, correct?
Right, which is a separate discussion. The grants were a
Right.
separate discussion. So I didn't know
Right.
if you were connecting the two, because it's just, if you save, I mean, it's always good to be efficient, right?
Right.
But it wouldn't necessarily always save tax dollars.
Right. And my way of thinking that is grants are still tax dollar funded, just in a different way.
Sure.
Do you know what I mean?
Right.
So grants still,
But the
it's just the
grants-
trickle down effect. We won't see it in our budget, but grants are still funded from tax dollar
dollars.
pockets.
Federal budget.
Correct.
But the way that the grants are, the grant money cannot be returned as surplus, correct, into the general fund, or can it? It cannot, so you'd want to exclude.
Right. It's
Commissioner
how you
Brody?
use it, not necessarily.
Commissioner Rhodey?
Hey, so I just wanted to go back to just the fact that if we are having a 5.6% increase, when you're asking people to look for cost savings, you're actually asking them to see how closely they can hold it to last year's spending. And so that's perhaps a different way of looking at it.
I like that, thank you.
Yes.
Commissioner South.
Yeah, so I guess I'm kind of confused here. I think there's been three different points made about any possible reduction. One was the 5%, and that may have just been a number, but that's the only number that was presented, so I'm using that. There was suggestion made by Commissioner Ebel that we don't have a number. I don't know if that was correct. Just talk to department heads and ask if there's savings. And I'm not sure if that was basically your point as well, Commissioner Rhodey, that we talk to departments and say, are there cost reductions available in this department? Is that basically a summation?
Well, I do think the direction that, I spoke with County Administrator Gibbs as far as going back to the departments and seeing what it is they are able to save, with the consideration that it will come out of more the general fund, not the grant dollars. And then I also to remember that this is our first work session, so some of these details can be refined. So I appreciate your questions. going forward. And on August 21st, I hope to have a more formulated plan that way, but it's really not Gretchen's plan or the board's necessarily. It's just the recommendation coming forward at the board, and then the directors of the departments, executive directors, would be responsible for what they think that their department can do as far as that contribution is concerned or the reduction.
May I speak? I mean, and if they come back and saying, look, we are, you know, offering all the services we can and without waste, what would be the response of the board at that point?
Those are the what ifs at this point. So like I said, there could be some refinement of kind of what the plan looks like.
Okay, because
it's
my
not
understanding is
meant to
that
be-
that's what they're gonna say is that
It's not meant to be terribly prescriptive. I'm not going to turn around to Jason and say, Jason, I expect you to reduce your budget in this particular line item by, that's not the role of the board. This is, like I said, at a much higher level of expectation, and then
Well, I understand what you're saying about high level, but I think you're getting almost too high level to the point where, we have,
let's see.
departments here. And our job is to provide oversight. And if there's, go to the list of positions added, we're adding a
I'm
digital
not getting
special,
that kind of specific.
but
right
that's
now,
what we're
Commissioner.
approving, right? We're approving this new hire and say, oh, there's a digital
Commissioner
specialist.
Biedema.
I guess just going off of Commissioner Zauster, I think I'm hearing a little bit, and he can correct me if I'm wrong, but you're looking to see if Administrator Gibbs has a plan of a specific ask when he sends out an email. Would that be fair? Can I ask that?
I guess that my question was for folks who are supportive is what is the ask of Administrator Gibbs? Are we saying, let's talk to department heads, ask them if there's waste in the department, and if there is, could they eliminate that and bring back a number? Is that the ask of him, or is the ask to tell every department, including administration, including corporate counsel, to reduce spending by 5%?
Commissioner Moss.
I just want to highlight that I heard Commissioner Zylstra telling us what all the departments are going to say. They're going to say there's no cuts. Okay.
That's not what I said. I said, if you
That's-
ask a department head, are you wasting money? They're gonna say, no, we're doing the best we can with the money that we get.
Right. And no one is asking the department heads, are you wasting money? That's not what we're talking about here.
Commissioner Rhodey.
I just also want to point out the fact that what we're working with right now is a proposed budget. So the departments, my understanding, what they were asked, what they would like their budget to be this year. This is not set in stone. They presented to us what they would like their budget to be, what they reasonably think it would be. And so it's my understanding that the departments don't run the county. That we actually have some responsibility here for oversight. And so when we're brought a proposed budget, it is our job to take a look at it and give it serious consideration. I mean, if I'm wrong, Administrator Gibbs, are these not requests from the department of what they would think their budget would operate as?
Yes, I mean, in that sense, it is a proposed budget. And so that's information that we have gathered from the departments, and now it's for consideration by the board, and you all are the ones who set the budget. I guess from my point of view, I want to make sure I give you all the information that is needed in order to be able to make those decisions. And I'm very happy to do that. As far as the question that would be asked to the department heads, I can work with our staff on that and fiscal services. But I would imagine, since you did throw out a number, we could use different numbers. But say if, not that it's absolutely going to happen, but if you had to make a reduction of 5%, 3%, whatever the number might be, can you give us that scenario and what the numbers would look like? That is what at least I was planning to go with. If there's any modifications whatsoever, I'm very happy to accommodate that.
And oftentimes what ends up happening is that it does come back, you set, let's say, a 5% benchmark, and then the departments come back and tell you, this is what we can give. And
Right.
there's negotiation
That's
that goes back and forth with that. Commissioner Moss.
Sure, I'd just like to make I'm sure we all have a really good perspective that the board is not here to rubber stamp things from the departments. We don't just simply accept information without asking questions. I would venture to guess that this year there's been more questions asked than maybe ever before. You could see that evidenced in some of the new changes this board has implemented and administration has implemented, and putting, more grant information, making it publicly available, listing vendors that are being paid, making that publicly available, trying to allow people to ask the important questions that we are responsible to do for our taxpayers. So any idea of that we're going to rubber stamp things is just a little silly.
Commissioner Bonema.
You can go and I'll go next.
Go ahead. Commissioner Bonema.
Thank you. In your first 7 months as administrator, I know that you've been having meetings about department budgets with the directors all throughout this period of time. Is this question something that you actually address during those meetings? You ask about repurposing spending, wasteful spending, changes in different parts of their department to increase efficiencies. Isn't this normally standard operating procedure for you?
Yeah, questions come up about the structure of the departments. How's it running? Anything that can be done to increase efficiency. Of course, that comes up all the time.
And your experience so far, do you feel like they've come to you to say, we think we can make cuts here? Isn't that already included in the proposed budget where you've already had those conversations? Or do you think that there's still room for more discussion because it wasn't quite completed in the last discussion?
It's not a matter of something not being completed in the past discussion. It is a matter of the relationships, and we do have the relationships where I can ask those questions. We can get answers on them.
And do you feel like you can have those questions answered before our next meeting?
Yeah, we'll see what we can get. I mean, we'll talk to the departments and see where the conversation goes. But yeah, I mean, we can ask a question and start the discussion there.
This is a very common practice in a business model for start of the new budget year as well. Very common. So Commissioner Miedema.
So just how I'm seeing it is the request that Administrator Gibbs would have with the different department heads. Yes, they would bring forward a proposed change of ways that they could reduce, but that doesn't necessarily mean they will be reduced. Then that comes to the board and we get to deliberate of going, okay, this is what they came up with. And we might say, yes, we agree. And there might be some of us that go, we don't want them to reduce they did their best job. They came with what they would reduce. If they have to, they would rather not reduce. And then we do as a board get to decide if that would be in the best interest of the people or if it wouldn't. And so I do think it's responsible to ask, but at the same time, realizing that just because the ask happens does not mean that means it's going to be an instant, like whatever they bring forward, it's going to be like, see ya, that's done, right? It needs to be the responsibility then as the board to weigh in on those decisions and look at those quite seriously. So that's how how I'm seeing it.
Commissioner Zalstra.
Yeah, thanks. I just want to address a point real quick. I mean, I understand that, over the last 7 months, we have not rubber stamped things. But in two areas, both in administration and council, we have, right? I mean, just today we said, oh, we're going to go up 50,000 versus what was asked, right? There was a position I asked for a digital specialist, which was approved for administration. The increase in salary for administrative assistant to senior aide, that was approved, So I just want to point out that there are certain departments that don't seem to receive the level of scrutiny that other departments receive. And I think we need to address that as we kind of finish this budget process.
Commissioner Miedema.
I can understand that his perspective on that, but at the same time, each of those departments also has things that they might be able to save. So while those ones were ones we decided as a board, that's actually an area we wanted to increase, not reduce. It's the same thing looking at the different things that are proposed to us as possible reductions, and we get to again deliberate if that's a priority of the whole.
Commissioner Rhodey.
And I would also just point out that there were multiple personnel requests that came in from departments across the county where we have added positions really throughout the county over the year.
It meets our growing population needs
Right.
too. Commissioner Moss?
Yeah, I'd say that was very well said. I do hear Commissioner Zylstra making accusations of the board. I do think that's probably, that's what he said. You're rubber stamping, right? It's going to be in a Holland Sentinel article in about 10 minutes, right? But one thing I'd like to identify is Commissioner Cosby, you referenced that these questions that we're talking about are very common. And you said in business, or maybe in your experience in hospital administration or other things like that. Ironically, I'm not confident they've been very common in the county. I would like these questions to be common in the county. I'd like this to be standard operating procedure in the county so that the county can function a little more like a well-run, well-oiled machine. We know the staff are working extremely hard. You look at some of the great improvements, even just this year. So Administrator Gibbs challenged our facilities department to restructure, to reorganize. That allowed Blake to focus on compliance and to readjust all the people in his department. And not only does that best steward the human capital in the department and the people who are working for us, for the people of Ottawa County, for Blake, but it also can provide significant millions of dollars in cost savings over the long term because they're going to be much more proactive in what that department does. So taking these concepts from business, from hospital administration, from whatever else, this is very healthy. And I'm really glad that this board is taking that approach.
Thank you. Any further discussion?
Yeah,
Thing?
I'll add one.
Commissioner
So-
Bonema?
Yeah, just in my conversation with Commissioner Moss before we began, we were discussing what our experiences have been a little bit in meeting with directors and looking over budgets. And Commissioner Moss's response was that the county government seems to be running very lean. So I think that's a nice compliment. So I just want to make sure that that's made public as well.
Thank you. And I see Blake has returned. Blake, we have an item for the budget, county building usage. Would you mind coming and speaking to the board?
Sure. Sorry, meeting ran over.
That's all right. That's all right.
Um,
So one of the, budget items that we were looking to address was our county building usage. How many buildings do we have? How, it's like, do we have volume counts or capability of counting how much use is actually occurring of each county building?
as far as staff, public,
Probably public use
Okay.
as well. Yeah, and you would probably have the nuances of there are probably buildings that are really just staff buildings too, without public use. But is there an opportunity to have the buildings used more efficiently?
that is one of the goals of this coming fiscal year is to kind of look at that space planning. What does, now that we're fully out of the shutdown from COVID and staff and everybody's returning back to work, what has transformed versus how we used to operate in, March of 2020 versus today? What possibilities and savings are available? What does that look like? The models out there in the industry have kind of shrunk down the square footage per person, per staff, more team space, less office space, that type of stuff. So we haven't had a chance to apply that yet as we dig out of the weeds, but that's the direction we're heading, is to provide that, because we want to be consistent and responsible in the remodel requests that we get for CIP. We need to be able to evaluate what is our goal, what is our standard, prioritize those things so that when we do a remodel or a reconfigure, it's correct.
Excellent. So you're thinking fiscal year 2025?
Yeah, we should have better modeling and standards on that of the direction. Here's kind of the projected what we'd like to see as a recommendation, and then do we have support? And is that how we want to move forward as a standard?
Wonderful.
much as we would like to standardize our ADA as well.
Excellent.
And make-
Are there questions? Yep. Commissioner Bonema?
Yeah, Blake, you might not know, I work in commercial insurance.
Mhm.
And so in my daily role, I'm touring buildings and seeing how offices have adjusted to post-COVID and more increased, or I should say, increased acceptance of people working remotely.
Mhm.
Right. One thing that I'm seeing across the board is that these offices have looked and they've realized that more and more of their staff are working remotely, and that's okay.
Mhm.
And with that, they're taking away their designated office space, creating kind of a bullpen of offices where you may not, when you do come into the office 1 day, 2 days, 3 days a week, you may not always have the same desk.
Mhm.
It comes from a shared space.
Yep.
I've noticed that in some of my tours of our facilities that there's a lot of empty desks. Obviously, work's getting done, but empty desks. So hopefully we're looking at that as a way to adjust to using the space more efficiently versus growing more space that maybe includes more empty desks.
Well, and you're absolutely correct. In West Michigan, we are quite fortunate to have global companies who revolutionize the workspace on a monthly basis. That they're an asset. We can reach out to them.
They're in my district.
We've
Yeah.
we've met with Hayworth a couple times now to look at, what are they doing? Here's a hypothetical that they showed us that was really quite intriguing. One of their higher ups has an office. It's a wonderful office, but he's not there every day. So his desk actually folds into like a credenza that locks, and the room becomes a small team space so that it has 2 uses, not 1. So there's concepts out there like that. We want to reach out to the other vendors and manufacturers in this area to kind of create that. And then it's something we're going to have to maintain is, this evolution is going to continue as technology goes. Every 3 to 5 years, we're going to want to look at that standard and figure out where we're at, reevaluate our process.
Do you know how many square feet we have in total? Is that a
In
number you have
total?
at the top of your head, or?
In total, we're about 752,000 square feet. Now, of that square footage, that includes storage. Obviously, we haven't went down that rabbit hole yet of
Usable.
inmates and what their space looks like.
That's usable space. Yeah.
Yeah, so I don't have it broke out exactly yet as to shared spaces, rentable square footage, office space, that stuff.
That's heated and cooled and maintained
Mhm.
space.
Yep.
Thank you. Any further discussion? The fiscal year 2025. I'm looking forward to that information. Thank you for being so proactive.
Yeah,
Too.
no
You and
problem.
fiscal services.
Yeah,
Thank you.
we're excited to actually have the data and answers. So
We are too.
good.
Thanks, Blake.
Mhm.
All right. And a motion to committee report. We probably didn't need to. Do we need to vote on this? No, I don't think we do.
No.
No,
Yeah.
Did we open it up to other opportunities?
Did. Are there other action items or items for discussion that our other board members would like to bring forward for next meeting on 8/21? Or you can reach out and email to me as well.
Do we feel good about the clerk's office now with the new voting requirements in the county and that they have substantial funds to be able to keep voting open longer and staff and location resources? That might be something we want to hear
Clerk's
from
office. Justin.
Clerk Roebuck. Yeah. Election integrity, right?
That's right. Did you pay attention to what's happening up in Muskegon, or did 3 years ago? Any other subjects? Items? Seeing none. This is time for public comment. Second public comment.
I'll go first.
Okay,
Besides, I have to get up.
thank you.
My name is Bob Spayman, Blendon Township. I was gonna talk about the budget for a second, but I wanted to talk about a couple other things. Mr. Jordan, talked about the FOIAs, that he has done. I think it was 21 hours at $225 an hour. It's $5,000 under that. And that's not a big portion of that 110 that was approved, obviously. And so I don't see that as a big deal. But the big deal of it is that there's, as far as I know, there's no other county, no other municipality, and I've been around with 22 years of experience in government. And there is none of them that use an outside counsel to do it. And we're paying $225 when it could be done by a $20 clerk. Well, she's working here or he is working here anyway. Anyway, that's my point. But you know what they say about lawyers. How can you tell when they're lying? When their lips are moving. So I'd be careful about that. And the other thing was on this 5% or 2% or 3% or whatever, you can't do it across everything. And in my opinion, I would cut legal 20%. So you'll never agree on everything like that. And some departments can't do it. Some of them are grant funded, too many variables about with it. And there's, as far as the service issue and that discussion, if you cut 5% of a person's budget, it's a people business. Keep in mind, it's a people business. It's not like a regular business. Mr. Moss's business is a lot different than government business. So I want you to keep that in mind too. They're two separate entities. I owned a business for 15 years before and after I got into government. So I know about that. You guys are new at this. The other thing is on the, let me check my notes here. Oh, on the budget, Karen's crew, Karen's team did an excellent job on the CPI and on the budget with direction from Mr. Gibbs. She cannot do more or less without that direction. Okay. So now this is Mr. Gibbs' budget until you approve it. So my questions are going to be directed at him during the public hearing, and I've got a number of them. And it's going to be cover your butt, gals and guys, because it's going to be open discussion on this. And so I hope he knows where all the money is being spent, because I'm going to ask him questions. When I ask questions, most of the time I know the answer.
Thank you.
So it's for his benefit. Thank you.
Any further public comment?
Lori Grassman, Robinson Township. Actually, government is a business and I've owned one for 15 years. We've gone from big business to little business. You go up and down. And the one thing you do every year in a business is wonder where you can cut because it's astronomical, right? And so that's, I guess, what I loved listening to this, because we've had to do that personally many, many times, especially when inflation is high. You have to find somewhere to cut. What do you cut? Do you cut employees? Do you cut paper? Do you cut pens, supplies? Where do you go, right? And so I guess my one question is do we actually need all the departments that we have? Like maybe that would be something to be looked at. You know, I think it's a good idea to look at, like, if there are employees that haven't been there, there's obviously other great employees that have been able to pull up some bootstraps and keep going. You know, sometimes that has to happen in times of inflation and hardness, and that might have to happen here to save some money. So I thank you for all those questions.
Thank you. Any further public comment? Once, twice, no further. This meeting is adjourned.